Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Between Friends. I'm here filling in for Eileen, and I also have a special guest that's going to be filling in with me. And so I want to welcome everyone and just go ahead right away and welcome Deborah Jones, and we can talk about what we're going to be talking about today. So, hey, Deborah.
Hi, Ashley. Great to be here.
Yeah, good to be here too. And I appreciate you joining me. As you know, when there's something technical going on, I always come to you because I know that you've dealt with it all in one way or another with all of your history. And so today we're talking about bird's nest and how we can handle them. So, of course, I wanted to see if you would join me because I knew you would have some awesome technical information. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, Ashley, it's just because I've made a lot of mistakes and I got to learn how to fix them. So today's topic is kind of about fixing what happens when you get a bird's nest.
Right, absolutely. And it's something that we deal with regularly, even though we don't don't want to admit it. But I have to say, Deborah, I know a lot of the new embroidery machines actually have taken some of the issues that cause a bird's nest out of the equation. And so a lot of advances in machines and things like that. I know there's certain things in place that help make this possibly prevent it, right?
Well, right. And of course, Ashley, one great way to prevent it is to listen, to your machine, right, Ashley? Because
Absolutely.
you can tell when you have a bird nest coming, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think the majority of us, and I bet a bunch of our viewers out there too, as you're watching, tell us if you do this. I know I love to just watch my machine embroider. It's mesmerizing. I usually describe it, Deborah, like watching an aquarium. You're just fascinated by everything that's going on. And we watch it enough and we hear it enough that the least little change in the sound that it's making usually is something going on. So stopping your machine right there can be a huge help, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. So Deborah, we have tons of people joining us from all over. So we'll just say hi to some of them as they're joining. So Sheila from Massachusetts. We've got Holly from New Jersey. Thanks for joining, everyone. And so we got Constance from Southeast Oklahoma. Not too far from Texas there, right?
Right. My father's from Southeast Oklahoma, so that's some known territory for me.
Yeah, very cool. And so we've got Oregon in the house. Thanks for joining, Kathy. We've got Donnell from Arizona. I bet it's nice and sunny in Arizona. What do you think? And we've got Darlene from Indiana. Jill, thanks for joining. You know Jill. I know Jill. Thanks for joining, Caroline. So I always love seeing what Caroline is doing. Reen is with us too. And so thanks for joining, Reen. And even our very own Roy Garland. Thanks for being here, Roy. So if we have any technical difficulties, we'll shout out to Roy.
Oh, absolutely.
And so lots of...
Yeah, right.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Sorry?
I said, "Oh, I thought you were gonna say something, so
I
I was
said,
just
he's
letting you
our
know."
first call. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree. So, Patty from Florida. So we've got people joining from all over. So thanks everyone for being here. So tell us over in the chat, have you had a bird's nest in your embroidery? And also tell us too if you were able to save your project. I always love hearing those stories too. But if they weren't, Deborah, we're going to give them some tips today, right?
Absolutely. And, bird's nests are one of those things that sometimes tends to happen when we're on a deadline, Ashley, when we're got that one garment we can't replace, so we really want to give some tips on how to avoid and how to recover those
Right.
birds nests when they happen. Sure.
Absolutely. It's like our machine knows, right? It's like it's a feature that's built into every embroidery machine that it knows you only have one item and that's the opportunity to eat it, I feel like. So I do feel like that's a feature with every machine that I've owned for sure. So so Deborah, if everybody is not familiar with a bird's nest, they are lucky. First of all, I want to say that. So, but we are not talking about that cute little nest with those little eggs in it today. Deborah, tell them what we're talking about.
Well, Ashley, I'm going to tell them what we're talking about, and I'm also going to ask for viewers if it is um, a friendly, well, not a friendly term, but a term that could be published or broadcast, what you call a bird's nest. Okay. I've heard some names that are not for prime time, Ashley, but a bird's nest is that bunch of thread that clusters underneath your hoop. It can even be underneath your needle plate. It can get pushed down into the needle plate and even just stuck there, Ashley, right?
Right, absolutely. And so and that a lot of times it is just that. It's on top and on bottom and it's so tightly sewn or stitched to the needle plate that it's actually really hard to even get something under there to release it, right?
And yes, and also, if it's a hard cluster that has been forming for, a few stitches, it can break your needle. And that's not a good thing because that can create a burr on your needle plate or, that missing piece of needle that you're, trying to find.
Right, absolutely, which is kind of scary when you can't locate a chunk of your needle and you know it's missing for sure. So, so Deborah, I always like to talk about the cause of a problem because I am a technical person. So if I know the reason, it helps me understand a lot of times how to prevent it. So I wanted to share with everybody these causes that we have found, and I know some of them I've learned from Deborah. I haven't experienced all of them, but I know that you've probably experienced most all of these causes. But really, it's about a tension imbalance, right? So something's going on, where it's not balanced, whether it's not in the disc or your tension is just off in general, and so that's what causes the bird's nest. So is a tension imbalance. And so the first one that I want to mention is like things that go on with your top thread, Deborah, that could cause a bird's nest. So do you want to talk about a few of these?
Oh, you bet. Because, tensions are something that, are a territory that some people don't like to get into, especially sometimes actually technicians tell multi-needle owners, don't touch these tensions. I've got them set. Don't touch them, but they aren't realizing that the user needs to have knowledge about they may need to change that tension when they change thread type or any number of circumstances. So sure, let's talk about some of those that and also the fact that yeah, we need to sometimes make adjustments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you, Deborah. It's kind of we don't like to change things that we don't really know how to put it back, and adjusting your tensions. If it's not a digital manner, if you're having to do it with like your bobbin tension, a lot of times we're nervous to do that because we don't know if we're going to be able to get it back when we do need to get it back to where it was before. So I agree with you on making that adjustment is kind of nerve wracking sometimes for those of us at home.
Right. So, Ashley, sometimes that if you've got thread that's curling a lot, it can actually jump out of that take up lever. Or it can, my goodness, your bobbin can jump out of the bobbin assembly there. So, sometimes these things happen and we don't have, we didn't necessarily create that situation.
Yeah, exactly. And so to prevent those things, knowing what causes them is to me the easiest way to prevent them. And I do know that curly thread, Deborah, is some of the later models of machines, at least I know a couple of mine do, they have a latch at the top of the take up lever so that the thread can't actually jump out of the take up lever. Even if
Right.
it's curly, it's trapped in there. So
Right.
that's one thing I know my machine has to help prevent that, right?
Yeah, right in the tension path there, right.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just are in a hurry, or we don't get that thread snugged through the thread path correctly, or we just don't put it through the take up lever, Ashley.
Right. Yeah. I think some of us thread our machines like we're on a race because we've done it so many times. And so definitely, taking your time. I always tell people, Deborah, to hold, one hand, usually my right hand, at the end of the spool where put my spool on my machine, and hold that tight so that as I'm pulling my thread, that it's going to slip in the tension disc. When we thread and we're pulling it and the thread's pulling off the spool, sometimes can cause that issue too. So
Right. And you can, and that's a really good tip, Ashley, because you can then feel it when it gets between those tension discs inside the machine, because we can't see those.
Yeah, right.
When we're threading a single needle machine. So that's a great tip. And, the same thing applies, Ashley. If you thread your machine with the presser foot down, you're not getting between those discs.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. They're closed, and then the thread just sits on the outside and is not able to go into the tension disc. So, and all of those things right there, Deborah, we are talking about a loss of upper tension. So if you don't have your thread in the take up lever, or if it's not in the disc, the tension disc, then you have essentially zero
Right.
thread tension up top. And
Right.
so that's where that imbalance is caused. And so, Deborah, that's too, what you have told me too, just recently, top thread too loose and bobbin thread too tight. So it's pulling too much to the bottom of your project can be an issue too, right?
Right. But, Ashley, it can sometimes be a little bit of a guessing game as to which of these situations exist, right?
Yeah,
And that
absolutely.
image you had on that slide of the tension test, really, that is such a great way to see which one's tight, which one's loose, or vice versa, because, your illustration there shows on the reverse side of that sample that ideally we want that 1/3 bobbin thread running down the center. And that's not to say it's going to be that way, textbook wise all the time, in every stitch out, or every stitch type, or every stitch size. But the good thing is that if those of you who have a multi-needle machine, if only, if most of them look like we see in this picture, then that you've got your tensions pretty well on target, and maybe just adjust that one that looks like an anomaly, right? But, chances are that that's the one that's gonna, create the problem.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a good test. A lot of times I do that on my multi-needle, but you can also check your tension in the same manner on any flatbed single needle machine. Stitch just a letter, like in this case, like the letter I, Arial font, just those column stitches. You chest and look at the back and see if you've got about 1/3 of each, or roughly, right, Deborah?
Right. And what some experts recommend is to stitch the word fox, because it causes your movement, your hoop movement, to be in every possible direction, both diagonals, a complete circle, and horizontal and vertical. So that's a good test, because it just shows you that you're not going to have any issues in any direction on drop stitches and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good one. So checking in all directions. So we've got some viewers out there, Deborah, that mentioned having bird's nests. So yes, on the bird's nest, Anne says, and yes, on saving my project. She said, I have my 10 needle threaded incorrectly. So definitely glad Anne was able to save it for sure. So, and
we should point out, Ashley, probably that's the most common cause, rather than just a tension imbalance, because when it's threaded incorrectly, it's almost guaranteed to cause a problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. So, but a lot of times we're in a hurry and we don't check. And so,
Right.
and that's usually whenever we've got that last project, we've got that one left that we need to get done. So, and then Valerie Brown says that, yes, my most recent mess was so bad that she had to take the embroidery foot off and she had to use the bird's nest tool. So glad she had the bird's nest tool, right, Deborah?
Well, there's really no substitute for it. I mean, I have to reach for mine from time to time, for sure.
I totally agree. And Susan says that she just bought the bird's nest tool. So thank you, Susan. I think that it'll be a handy tool when you do have an issue. So, and Vicky says bird's nest. Ugh, what a long process to save it. So it definitely can be, for sure. So, and then Jennifer Alexander says, I have bird's nest and I have bird's nest toolkit, and I've been able to save my project and add extra stabilizer in the back, which is actually a really good point that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, right?
That's right. Yep. Smart gal.
I love that. I love that. So, and then Chris says, I don't like birds that ruin my project. I can relate, Chris. I really can. So, okay. So bobbin issues. So now we've talked about things that could happen up top and ways to possibly prevent. And so, but there can be bobbin issues too. So we talked about the bobbin tension being too tight and pulling too much top thread. But if you've got an imbalance where the bobbin tension is too loose, can also cause an issue. Putting your bobbin in backwards or even the wrong size. Deborah, like you just said, like the wrong size bobbin sometimes can cause the bobbin to bounce around in your bobbin case, right? Yeah, and then the bobbin being wound too loose. So do you have any good solutions for if the bobbin's round too loose, Deborah?
Well, sure. I love my pre-wound bobbins, Ashley, and I know you do too. And it's such a pleasure just to go to that container and pull out a fresh bobbin. And I can tell you one of the biggest benefits, aside from risking a bobbin being wound too loosely or unevenly or any other symptom, is that you always get more thread on a bobbin that is pre-wound in the same size bobbin in your style A bobbins or your style L bobbins. You'll always have more yards on a pre-wound because they are wound by a different method, factory wound, and you're going to be able to leave it in the machine longer. What could be better than that?
Right, exactly. I know. And that's our, the thing that we dread the most, right? It's our bobbin running out in the middle of our project. So I definitely agree with that for sure. So the bobbin issues that could be caused too, so things, I mean, and we know, I mean, those are self-explanatory, right, Deborah? We know that if we've got the wrong size, we need to make sure we got the right size. Check your user manual. Also for threading it correctly, if it's a new machine, you're not familiar, double check your manual for that as well, for making sure you got the right bobbin. So, but what about flagging and bouncing? Deborah, tell us what this is, because not everybody, not everybody's probably familiar with what we're referring to with some of these terms. So bird's nest, flagging, all these terms are for other things, but we use them in embroidery for something different. So tell us about flagging.
Well, flagging is kind of what it sounds like, Ashley. It's when that hoop is just bouncing up and down. It kind of reminds one of a waving flag, and it can be caused by incorrectly hooped fabric, like too loose. And I know you're going to show us, Ashley, how to hoop properly, but also you might be working on a material that and maybe not using the correct needle point type, and that needle is pulling that hoop up with every upstroke. So the hoop's coming up with the needle. That causes flagging and bird's nest for sure. So, that may be caused because you're doing a material that's coated or that is a synthetic, and it needs a special embroidery needle, Ashley.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I bet that's something else, Deborah, that they can hear at their machine,
Oh,
because when I hear that, it's like that popping noise,
right,
that you
right.
hear. Yeah. And so I think that that's another really good point. So, but when our fabric's bouncing around, our machine is very precise at tying that notch to make that stitch, when the needle comes down. So when your fabric is bouncing and your hoop is bouncing, it's having a hard time making that stitch. And so if it can't form the stitch, and then the thread will miss and start to pile up underneath. So yeah, I've got an example here, Deborah. I'm going to show them how to check their hooping to make sure that they don't have it hooped poorly or that it's not flagging. So I'll head over here. Here's a little design that I stitched that we're going to see a little bit later, but I'll show both with our standard hoop and with our magnetic hoop. When you're hooping, a lot of times we loosen this screw up really wide, so that when we put our stabilizer and our fabric in place, then we want to make sure that that inner ring goes into place really easily. And so then we tighten this down here. And so this is an example here. Since my embroidery's on there, it actually makes a really good example. But look at all this stuff right here. So this is pour hooping. And as I push, Deborah's told me in the past that you call this the snowplow check, right? So if your fabric is bunching up in front of your finger, and it's you can kind of see that bubble there, then you're not hooped properly, and that can be an issue. Also, the pinch test. So like, can you grab it and lift it? And I can. So I can actually grab that fabric and lift it so it's all bunched up there. So I'm going to actually move to the center of my towel here to give you another hooping that hopefully will look a little bit better. So making sure everything's nice and smooth, and inserting that inner ring. Now, when I was hooped down here, I tightened up my inner ring, and then I just popped it out so that I could move. So actually now my hoop is what we call pre-tensioned, because I actually had tightened it down for the towel down here. So what I can do now is just get everything nice and smooth, and just put that inner ring in. And I like to, just kind of smooth everything out and then push that down in there. Because I pre-tensioned it down here, I don't have to tighten that anymore. It's the right tension. Now, those are where this towel has been folded. But now when I do my test for my snowplow, I don't have that. And I also can't pinch it. So now I'm hooped properly so that I don't get that flagging. So when you hear somebody say pre-tension your hoop, that's what they're talking about. So a lot of times we put it in loose and then we tighten this down as tight as we can get it. But if it's already the right amount of tight for this particular item, then all I have to do is slide my inner ring in place. So when you pop that out of place, and then when I put it back in, that's what's called pre-tensioning your hoop for that particular fabric. And of course, every fabric, it'll be different. So if we're hooping this tea towel this time, next time we will need to adjust the tension for, a different item. And then let me show too on our Snap Hoop Monster. So you guys know our magnetic hoops, but the same principle here. I'm going to place my stabilizer down and then I'm going to put my towel over top. And then just double check, make sure my stabilizer stayed where I needed it to. And then with the magnetic top frame, I'm lining that up with that metal base. Now here's the difference with the magnetic frame. Because it's not recessed, I can actually just slightly pull on my fabric to make it taut. Now, I don't do that with knits. I will pull on the stabilizer and the fabric, but if you've got a fabric that doesn't have some stretch to it, you can see how I can kind of pull that wrinkle out. And now if I check, the same thing, I don't have the snow plowing and I can't pinch to grab my fabric. So that's a good hoop, right, Deborah?
Absolutely. That is some great hooping tips, Ashley. And honestly, we really want to make sure you follow that we follow those guidelines, especially on stretchy fabrics, knit fabrics, but it matters for all fabrics, of course. But you really don't want those knits getting pushed around under that needle, right?
Right, absolutely. So that there's nothing worse than having a design that doesn't stitch out correctly and it could have been prevented. I think that's definitely the worst. So,
Right.
and so now that we know what flagging is and we know how we can attempt to prevent it, what about the needle plate, Deborah? If we have some sort of mishap, sometimes our needle can strike the needle plate and cause a little burr there. And that too could be an issue with bird's nest, right?
Oh, absolutely. And thread breaks, Ashley, because you created somehow a bird nest got created. It may have broken your needle, or when we use any kind of, sometimes our first instinct, Ashley, especially those who don't have a bird nest toolkit, may grab their scissors and they're reaching in there and trying to cut that with their scissors. And it's possible, because that's a rather imprecise tool for this task, to scratch that needle plate, in the process. So also, Ashley, even if we get the bird's nest out and we take the cover off the bobbin case area, we might be getting in there with tweezers and trying to get all the thread out, and we scratch our point of our hook, so that is something that can absolutely happen. And you can't even see it, Ashley, right? When you have a burr on a needle plate or any metal in your machine, including that point of that hook that picks up the thread, well, that burr, even though it's invisible, can cause thread breaks. So we need to get rid of those burrs. And it's just a good practice to kind of polish it up. So especially if you just use some metal tools or had a needle break to remove a bird's nest. So
Yeah, sure.
there is some ways to do that.
Yeah, and if you can't get to your service department, because that is something that if you take your machine in and they find that burr on your needle plate, of course, they'll, correct that for you. But Deborah, sometimes we're not able to get to our service department right away. And so this is actually a product that you have told me about that's good to have on hand. And then you could possibly remove that burr with this item. So tell us about this.
Well, Ashley, this is called crocus cord. It comes a number of different ways. You can get a cord. You can get a tape, and you can, which is just a wider material, and you can get a crocus cloth actually at the hardware store. I think Ace True Value is one who does carry it if you ask for crocus cloth. Now the cord is actually made to go inside that needle hole and used like a shoe shine cloth to polish. And this material is such a fine emery material that it will not scratch your machine. In fact, this is what the technicians use to remove. But for you, it's a lot less expensive to do it yourself. As Ashley mentioned, you may not be easy to take that big machine into the service center when you could just polish using a crocus cloth. So it's just like it sounds, CROCUS, and cloth, or crocus tape, crocus cord. So this is something available at sewing machine supply houses. And it is also, as I said, in a sheet form available at a lot of hardware stores under the name crocus cloth. And it's something that it will magically make those thread breaks stop if you're getting thread breaks after a bird nest.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so Ann Philbeck says, I love these tips. So thank you. And so I do too. I've told you guys before, I learned so much from Deborah and Eileen and all of you, right? I mean, we learn all the time still. So there's a few more comments I wanted to share to Deborah. So A. Reichert, which I happen to know is Eileen. And so Eileen says that my dealer told me I needed the bird's nest tool when I bought my machine. Didn't understand then, but thrilled when I needed it. And so that's a good dealer. I like that. So
right. And I did see, right. And I did see another viewer ask Eileen what it looked like, and so a little we're going to show you, don't worry. That's coming up.
That happens to be a dime tool that we definitely will be talking about. And so Jill Klein says she calls them thread terrors. So I like that. I like that. It's definitely a good description. So, and then Darlene says she's had some where she's been able to save, and then some where she's not been able to save her project, which, I certainly can relate to that as well. So, and then this is a good question here. Marina says that she's confused which bobbin case to use with pre-wound bobbins with embroidery. She said she has a Brother Stellaire and it came with 2 cases. So, Deborah, do you have a comment on that?
Well, my comment on that is ask your dealer.
Yeah, for sure.
They'll steer you in the direction.
For sure. And the case that you use for embroidery, it doesn't matter if your bobbin is pre-wound or not pre-wound. You're going to use the case that is for embroidery, no matter which, type of bobbin that you're putting in. So that's kind of what I was thinking. So whenever she was saying that she wasn't sure with the pre-wound. So, and then Stephanie says, I just got here and she said, I have all things correct. My machine does not like the pre-wounds. I put a regular bobbin and everything is fine. So I love bringing those things up to Deborah, because I do think our machines are all different, but, the pre-wound bobbins, they're not all created equal. So I wanted you to be able to talk about this comment too, that, just because it doesn't like one pre-wound bobbin. So do you have any information on that?
Well, sure. Of course, you want to make sure it's a pre-wound bobbin that's intended for your machine type. And I don't necessarily mean style, okay? Because, for example, there are bobbins that you can use that really are made for, let's say, an industrial machine, not for a home machine. So we want to use the type of bobbin that is recommended for our machine type. And, there's certainly nothing wrong with using a bobbin that you wind yourself. I mean, we don't want to make it sound like that's not a good thing to do
Right.
because it's fine. But I think if you tested another recommended another brand of pre-wounds recommended by people who use your machine type that are successful with it, you would probably be successful with it too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So don't ward off all pre-wounds. There are definitely other options. So I just wanted to mention that for
I'm
sure.
just
So
curious, and she might answer us over in the comments if you own a single needle or multi needle machine. I'd be
oh, okay.
interested in that.
Yeah, so Stephanie, tell us, do you own Stephanie Fowler? Do you own, is it a single needle or a multi needle that you feel like doesn't like the pre-wound? So tell us that over there in the chat. So, and so Deborah, another thing that we need to make sure we stay on top of that could very well contribute to the possibility of a bird's nest is a dirty or an unmaintained machine, right?
Oh yes, and this happens sooner than you think, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so I do feel like, depending on what you're stitching on, obviously, there's always lint and things that get in all kinds of areas, and sometimes it's just dust. So clearing out your bobbin, cleaning that area, but also your tension disc, making sure that they're clear and not using, like spray adhesive near your machine, things like that are going to gunk stuff up. So keep your machine in running order, see your service guy, as often as recommended so that they can make sure everything's working properly. So I
Good.
definitely agree. It's not our
Right.
favorite part, but it's definitely a necessity. So, and then speaking of the multi-needle, we're going to see this a little bit later, but I just absolutely love this picture here, Deborah. So this is a bird's nest the image that Eileen sent me. And you had a tip for the multi needles when you're removing a bird's nest to first take the bobbin out, right?
Right, because on a multi-needle, the removing the bobbin case sometimes is all you need to do, because it's just a different type bobbin than we have in our traditional tabletop style single needle machines. So when you take that bobbin case out, or even if you take it partially out, it gives you some wiggle room, Ashley, to be able to get that
Yeah.
bird nest toolkit's scalpel in there, to cut. So taking that bobbin case out first is really the very first thing I do whenever possible, because as you all know, if who've experienced a bird's nest, one of the risks of getting the bird's nest is making a hole in the garment, and
Right.
you don't, and getting the more, if it's moved or tried to move too much, it can cause a pop out, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And so the when you remove that bobbin case, you automatically give some slack
Yeah.
to the whole hoop piece. So that's definitely a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. Give some slack because sometimes it's literally like stitched so tightly to the plate, you don't have any wiggle room. But I have to give props to Eileen. Like I said, she shared this picture with me on this topic. And Deborah, you know how sometimes things happen and you're like, I don't even know how that happened. So this is one of them. This is actually part of her design, actually pulled into the hole of the needle plate. And so I just had to give her props because that's probably something that can't ever happen again. It's kind of like a
Right.
one-time thing. So that's a pretty impressive one. So,
Yes.
and then, okay, now that we know what causes it and how to prevent it possibly, if it does still happen, then let's talk about how to fix it. And Deborah, I know you've got some great tips here too. So, I actually was working on this project here, this cute little shamrock design, and I added text across it that just said lucky. And right toward the end, I got this bird's nest, and you can actually barely see it there under the hoop. Like I said, it's hard to take pictures of that under the hoop. But flipped over, you can see that it's that pile of thread there on the back, and it's all down in my bobbin area. So that was the mess. So after it happens, Deborah, the first thing to do is to release it, right? So you've got to get it off of the machine.
Right.
So so tell us about our bird's nest toolkit here, and then I'm going to show them what it looks like under the camera.
Okay, so the bird's nest toolkit has two parts. One is the hook and one is the blade, or the blade on a handle. It looks like a scalpel. And the hook is intended for you to reach in and grab that thread cluster and try to get it to release. And sometimes that's really all that's needed. If it does release and you can pull the hoop out, that's great. Other times you're going to release it as much as possible and then take that scalpel tool and slice just the bird's nest, not the garment, and just slice through that thread so that you can get your hoop out and work on removing that bird's nest from the back of the item rather than leaving it there and just starting to sew again, Ashley.
Right. Yeah, because if you've got that clump of thread, then you need to remove that, or else you'll have issues probably right away again. And so I'm going to go under my camera here, Deborah, and show them what the bird's nest toolkit looks like. It comes in this really nice zipper case here. So it's easy to store and easy to find, this bright yellow color here. And when you open it up, you've got the blade, as Deborah mentioned here. So the tool, it's the stitch releaser, we'll call it. And then you've got the thread hook. And so you grab the nest with the hook and it pulls tension on it, and then you'll slice it with the blade. And so if you slice underneath the hook, then that'll help protect your project. So don't slice on top, slice underneath. And then this hook will be against your stabilizer in the back of your project there. It does come with an extra blade. So if you do use it enough that you have to replace it. But I want to just point out to everybody, be very careful when you take the cap off. There's actually a blade already installed. So I don't want you to get cut, but you can see that it's that sharp blade. It's got this long handle so that you can, slice underneath the hoop. So, and that's really handy because it's hard to get your scissors under there because they're thicker. And then just a little tip for that blade, it does come with an extra blade in the kit. And so to replace it, I always tell people to use like needle nose pliers because it'll pop off of this little latch here. So you just lift it and slide it like that. And you don't want to do that with your hands in case it slips. And so I just do like a little pair of needle nose pliers, and then you can just put it right back on there and make sure it's snapped in place. So hopefully you can see that, but just grab it at the base and you just kind of lift it a little bit, and then you can slide it off of there to replace the blade, and then slide it back on. So
and actually, like that long handle is so important because that's why scissors don't work. They're usually often not even long enough.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Deborah, too. So, and then just be really careful. It's super sharp. So, but yeah, look how long that is. Really nice and long, so you can get under there. So, and then I just always put it back in here to store it, and you'll know right where to find it when you need it, because that bright color, I can pick that out of my drawer really easily. So that's the first step, right, Deborah, is we got to release it from the machine. And then we definitely should clean our machine. And I do also, Deborah, recommend rethreading, regardless of what you think your top thread looks like and your bobbin looks like. Rethread everything. Start from scratch, and that's going to make sure that you've got everything threaded correctly, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of like, when you have a computer problem, they always remind us to turn our computer off and then back on. Same thing. Start fresh.
Start fresh. I totally agree. So clean everything out from underneath, rethread the bobbin, rethread the top before you start, to stitch your project again. So, and then after that, I always do that first and foremost because I don't want to forget one or the other. So I first clean the nest and rethread everything, and then I head to my workstation and I work on removing the thread nest. So get yourself a really sharp pair of scissors and cut away all of that excess there. And I usually go to the front and then even just use the tip of my scissors and pull up any loose threads so that I don't have anything loose that's going to cause an issue again. Now, Deborah, you gave me a tip about realignment. Normally, I might not remove all of those extra satin stitches, but I did use my stitch ripper, and the last letter, the letter Y, I removed every bit of the satin stitches and just left the underlay, which is a run stitch and then a zigzag stitch under there, because you gave a tip for realignment that we're going to see. So that was the reason I did that. But it's definitely important to remove all of the excess thread, whether you remove all of the satin stitches in that area or not, right?
Right, right. And Ashley, um, Joanne Banco is reminding us in the chat to change that needle as well.
Oh gosh, that's a really good point. Yeah, especially if it maybe had a burr, or if it got, damaged trying to go through that thick bird's nest. So yeah, really good point, Joanne. So absolutely. And needles, Deborah, they're the least expensive item of our entire embroidery process. And so definitely change those when you have an issue, but often as well, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And so if your item is still in the hoop, well, this is simple. I removed all of the excess bird's nest, all of that thread that was wound up underneath and bunched up underneath. And then I just put it back on the machine. And right here, I'm backing up my stitches. So, use the machine features to go backwards at least like 15 or so stitches. I usually do like 20 for good measure. And so back up so that it ties up, and then you start your design again and it's really lined up. So if it's in the hoop still and it's not dislodged, and it didn't get loose, right, Deborah, then you're really kind of home free, right?
Right, right. That's especially like in the case of your hand towel here, Ashley. It stayed nice and snug in the hoop, so no problem with just reinserting it and backing up,
Yeah,
completing that embroidery.
but as some people mentioned over in the chat, it doesn't always stay in the hoop. So if it comes out of the hoop, the frustration level escalates, and then we've got to figure out how to get it lined back up. So if it comes out of the hoop, let me give you a tip. This is one thing that I use, but Deborah has an even more precise way. And so I've actually got a little video of that. So let me head back under my camera here for a second, Deborah, and I'll show them about, one of the ways that I do this. So normally when we're stitching a design, we need to get it, back in the hoop. But if you can manage to get it centered in your sewing field, on our standard hoop, we've got those notches there. And the intersection of those notches, that's the center of our sewing field. So if you can get your design back perfectly center and square in the hoop, it would be easier to get back to that stitch and get it lined up. So in order to do that, you can do it with your standard hoop, or the same thing applies with your snap hoop monster. We're trying to get it back in the center of our sewing field. So mine is marked with my adhesive guides there. So I'm trying to get back to that 0. Now, one way that you can do that is that you can print a template of your design. And I can do this from our embroidery toolshed software. And this is Dime's print and stick target paper. So if I line up the picture of my design right on top of my embroidery, now I have this crosshair that's letting me know the center of my design. So now when I hoop, I am wanting to get that design square in the hoop, so horizontally and vertically straight. And then I'm also wanting to get as close as I can to the center. Now, one way to do that is Dime's PAL light. So let me show you this. This actually works with both our snap hoop monster, and your standard hoop would also work with this. So our PAL 3 light is this crosshair laser light that I can get centered. And now that's the center of my sewing field. So now when I place my stabilizer down and I've got my template ready to go, now I can line that up with that light, and that's going to help me get perfectly straight in the hoop. So then now when I put my magnetic top frame down, I'm wanting to line that up also with that 0, just like that. So now I know that I'm centered in the hoop. So now when I advance through my stitches to get back to that letter, I'm starting from a point to where my design is lined up. And so then I can advance back to that area that caused the issue. So that is one way to do it, to get back in the hoop nice and straight. So, but Deborah, I know that you have another way that I wanted to share with everybody. And I've got a little video here where I was using the method that you told me. And so tell us about this. I actually removed all the satin stitches, and you had given me a tip. And so tell me why it was a good idea to remove all of the satin stitches in this case.
Well, okay, Ashley, you see those run stitches there that are part of the tail of the Y. They look kind of zigzaggy, and even those down below to the side of the shamrock. Those are very precise to realign by and get the right angle, because just because you recenter that design doesn't mean it might not be off a little bit one direction or the other. And if you, particularly when you've got outlining, now this design does not have outlining, but if this were an outline design, this would be really critical. So you're going to want to uncover those stitches if they are not, so that anything that's on a curve, like these stitches are, or a right angle or some angle, that when you restart your machine right on those stitches, it's going to track exactly on that curve or exactly on that angle, and then you're home free.
Love that.
You are going to be properly aligned. You can finish it with confidence even on the outlines.
Well, let's see it in action, Deborah. And so you also gave me another tip too, which was using adhesive stabilizer, so that you don't have to worry about getting it in the hoop in the center. You're really sticking it exactly where you need it, right?
Exactly. So the problem with the 2-ring hoop or any 2-part hoop is that, of course, it'd be easier with a magnetic hoop than a traditional 2-ring. But here we're using the peel and stick, because if you try to track those little angle stitches and they're just a tiny bit off, a millimeter or 2 off, then just lift it and move it, inch it a millimeter. Very much easier to do than trying to rehoop by a millimeter, right, Ashley?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and especially with a standard hoop, you got to take it all off the machine, and then go back to the machine and adjust it, take it off, adjust it again, and put it back on the machine. So this is
So
definitely easier.
Right. So Ashley's stitching a couple of stitches, seeing how it tracks. And if it doesn't track correctly, then just stop and reposition just a little bit. That if it's a dense design, you may even want to slide another piece of stabilizer under that peel and stick, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And which another piece of stabilizer, Deborah also brings up another point is that even if it was left in the hoop and your stabilizer got a bit damaged or destroyed from you removing the bird's nest, put stabilizer back there, right?
Sure. Maybe
Yeah.
even fuse a piece of Fuse So Soft back there, because that's going to give a nice adhered result. Look how
For sure.
beautiful that,
Yeah.
and that tracked absolutely perfectly, Ashley.
That
Great
turned
job.
out great. It did. Yeah, it did. I was really thrilled with that. So that was a very good tip, Deborah, for getting back to those run stitches. Normally, I would only remove what I had to remove, and I would have left that little segment of those satin stitches there. But getting back to that run stitch for more precise placement, oh my gosh, that's $1 million tip there. So I love that. Thank you for sharing. So and then
Sure.
we've got some other comments here. Joanne Banco says that yes, love the tip for using the sticky. So I definitely agree with that. Makes it really easy. And then Dee Dee says, I've been lucky so far removing bird's nests with the micro tip scissors, but just ordered the nest remover toolkit just in case. I think she ordered that. So that's a good point. So it's always nice to have these on hand for when disaster strikes. So, and then this is a question for you, Deborah. So, because the Roxanne, I was asking about the thread. So, please rediscuss how to use the Corcos thread and is the needle or the
Yeah.
needle plate.
Right. So, Roxanne, it's really not for the needle, because we can just change the needle, right?
Right.
But the needle plate is probably the most important place to use it. Now, I don't have my camera hooked up like Ashley, but you see, this is a crocus tape. Okay, so it's kind of wide. I might use this to polish all around the top of my needle plate. Okay, but let's say that I'm still getting these weird, mysterious thread breaks. I might then want to use a crocus cord, which is very narrow. This is narrow enough to put down inside the needle hole of my needle plate and polish that. And I'm told that this is jeweler's rouge on fabric. Okay. And so it's not going to scratch your machine. It's used to polish jewelry, and it's used to polish our needle plates and hook assembly areas. You could even ask your technician about it, because they do use it. And as I mentioned, you can also get it in a fabric type,
Yeah.
In a sheet type at the hardware store, and you could use that to polish the flat surface, top and bottom of your needle plate. You can take that needle plate off and polish both sides, right, Ashley?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a really good tip, Deborah, for sure. So, and I definitely agree. To me, having something like that on hand is, even if you don't need it, it's just nice to have on hand in case you do. Like we said, you can't get to your service department or something. You could maybe, solve the issue yourself and get back to embroidering. But this, our Bird's Nest Toolkit, it's our special product for this episode of Between Friends, and it's another tool that is really nice to have on hand, just like some of you guys have already mentioned. When disaster strikes, if you have the tools on hand, you can get the problem solved and get right back to the fun part. And so snag this Bird's Nest Toolkit while it's on special, right, Deborah?
Right, because Ashley, I never have to hunt for mine, because I always
Yep.
keep it right where I can find it, because you never know
I
when
know.
that's going to happen, and you want to be able to get back to stitching
Yeah.
ASAP.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And so, so yeah, have it on hand. That way, if you need it, I used to tell people all the time too, Deborah, that it kind of works like insurance. If you own it, you probably won't get a bird's nest, but if you don't own it, you'll need it.
Right, right.
So get your bird's nest toolkit. And also we have hundreds of dealers across the country that are dime elite dealers that carry our dime products. So we have an elite group of dealers that signs up for our elite program, and they get our dime products first so that they have them there for you if you stop by their store. So you could also check for the bird's nest toolkit. It's not a brand new item, but I bet they would have it in their store. But if you're wondering if you've got an elite dealer near you, then let's see. So we have this little short video that shows all of the dealers throughout the country that are our elite dealers. So take a look at this short little video. So take a look at your local elite dealer. Check for them for all of your dime products. So, and before we do, so Deborah, this the next subject is near and dear to your heart, I know. But before we go on to this, I just want to say, Linda Brooks said that she needs one so she won't have a problem. I think she's talking about the bird's nest. And then several people I see, Deborah, are also asking for the name of that cord again. So can you tell it one more time and also spell it for them?
Sure. It's crocus cord, and it's crocus, like the flower, crocus cord, or
Love
crocus cloth. You could also call it crocus cloth.
Love that. So very good tip. I think everybody's loving that. So, so the next thing we wanted to share with everyone is our On the House design this week. Our On the House program, like I said, near and dear to Deborah's heart. She's the head of that. She develops all of those designs, beautiful designs, and we want you to share your projects. So on social media, use hashtag Dime Sew Along, hashtag On the House, or hashtag exquisite thread, and we can find your project. These designs are 100% free to you, and we're going to share with you in just a moment the new one for this week. But before we do, take a look at this video of some of the things that you guys have been making with the On the House designs. How cool. So the last few weeks of designs. And so make sure that you're downloading them each week. So Deborah, this week we have one of the cutest designs. I thought this was adorable because I'm a foodie. And so tell us about this On the House design. How cute.
Well, this is Easter cookies. We usually think about Christmas cookies, but these are Easter cookies, and they are really cute. And the way we made this design was where each cookie stitches completely. So in case you want to just stitch the bunny or the chick or the egg, it makes it easy to separate those. But of course, you could also just do a color sort and have 3 color changes, whichever you prefer. But each one does stitch out, and they're adorable, and they look real.
Yeah, they do. And Deborah, there's 0 calorie, which is even the best part, right?
Right. That's very good observation. But yeah, they turn out cute when you
Yes,
stitch them.
super cute. Yeah, for sure. So make sure that you head over to our site and download those free on the house designs. So make sure you get them while they're there. And these are the colors that Deborah chose. To me, it's very important for shading in this case, Deborah, because you're getting the variation in what a cookie would look like. So your thread choices do just that, right? It's all about the shading.
Right. And I do feel like it's important, if you don't have one of these colors, choose the next closest to it, but it is important to get the effect you see here. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we always give you the thread color choices so you can produce the same results. So make sure you take advantage of that if you need one of these colors. So I just wanted to say, Deborah, thank you so much for joining me. I do feel like it's always a pleasure working with you. I always learn so much from you, and I knew you would have some awesome tips on handling birds' nests. So just wanted to say thanks for being here with me.
Well, Ashley, you and I kind of think alike in terms of technical things, so it's always a pleasure to engage in a topic like this with you, because you get to dig a little deeper, and as you said, I always learn from you as well.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. Well, Deborah, until we're together again, I'm going to say bye for now. And you guys will see me next week. And I will be revealing the On the House project. And I'm going to be talking about cross stitching, Deborah, with your embroidery machine. So, and maybe a little spring decor with that cross stitch. So join me next week for Between Friends. I'll love to see you again. And then the week after that, Eileen will be back. And so until we're together again, we will see you guys next time.